But just a little bit of background before I get started. The Wolf Conservation Center is located, as Nancy said, in South Salem, New York. So if you're not familiar with where that is, we are in northern Westchester County. So just about, I'd say, an hour north of New York City. So, if you're ever down that way, it sounds like we might be having people visiting or joining us tonight from all over the place. But if you're ever down in that direction, look us up, register for a program, and stop by and see some of our wolves. So tonight I'm going to talk to you about, of course, wolves of North America, more specifically the wolves that we have at the Wolf Conservation Center and what we do at our facility and how it contributes to the conservation of wolves, not only worldwide, but more specifically, of course, in North America. So we focus on three things at the Wolf Conservation Center. We focus on education, recovery, and advocacy. So we do education programs such as this one. We have programs on site. We do all kinds of different things. We have after school, day camp, schools will visit us during the week, and then we have programs available to the public as well. So we really try to reach a lot of people with different ways of getting involved with conserving wolves. And, with COVID, it really kind of became a muscle that everyone was very able to exercise, doing these virtual programs. And we're really excited to have this tool in our tool belts now that we can, bring wolves to people all over the place, which is very exciting. Then we focus on recovery. So we are independently operated, but we're part of a federal recovery program. So we currently have 30 wolves living on site at our center. 28 of them are endangered animals. We have 2 different species of endangered animals, and I'll talk about them more in depth as we go through this program. But we have the critically endangered red wolf and the endangered Mexican gray wolf. And as part of this federal recovery program, one of our main goals for those wolves is to release them back in the wild where they belong. So that depends on the species. We're not releasing any wolves into the Northeast, but for Mexican gray wolves, they would go into the Southwest or Northern Mexico. And for the red wolves, they would go into North Carolina. And again, I'll talk about that more in depth in a little while. Also, as part of this federal recovery program, we sometimes have the opportunity to breed some of these wolves. With all of this, I'll really go into more detail later. But it is an exciting season right now because it is pup season. So hopefully we'll have some new endangered wolf pups on the ground, and they may have the opportunity to be released into the wild themselves, which of course is incredibly exciting. And then our last prong here is advocacy. So we try to get everyone to understand that as individuals, we all have the potential to make an impact using our voices to protect wolves and advocate for them. We really want people to understand that wolves need us. Some of us might think that wolves are really wonderful and fascinating, but a lot of people don't see wolves that way. And so we are science-based. We're not doing this because, we think wolves are special or magical or anything like that, although they are pretty neat. We are using the science and saying, wolves belong in the wild, but often they just need us to stand up and really fight for them. So 2 of our wolves that live at the Wolf Conservation Center are ambassador wolves. So basically that means they are representatives for their wild counterparts. So these 2 wolves have been hand raised. That is not something that we do with any of our other wolves at the Wolf Center, but we do think it's very important that people actually get to see wolves when they visit us. And wolves are naturally very fearful of people. And so it's really important that we do have animals that people will see, because again, with that advocacy need, a lot of the time it's difficult for people to become advocates for something that they don't necessarily see. And so our 2 ambassador wolves, Alewa and Nakai, since they were hand raised, they're very socialized to people. They don't have any interaction with the public, but they are very close up to the fence in our viewing area. They get snacks during every program. They get all kinds of enrichment activities. So we just had Easter enrichment this past weekend, which was very exciting. And so we're always trying to make their lives very exciting, because we know that, as ambassador animals, they'll never be released. And so we're trying to constantly thank them for that sacrifice. As an aside, they're subspecies of gray wolf, which is the Canadian or Rocky Mountain wolf. They're not currently a releasable population, which is why we can have them here as ambassador animals. But still, we want to make sure that their lives are really fulfilling, that they have lots of space in their enclosures, their day to day will vary, and that they're excited and, emotionally fulfilled, and that they have good lives. So this is Alewa. She's about to turn 12 years old next week, actually, which is very exciting. And then this is Nakai. He's about to turn 9 years old tomorrow. So happy early birthday, Nakai. Of course, this is not what he currently looks like. This is what he looked like at about 5 weeks old. But I think it's very fun, at least personally, to go through these pup photos and really get an idea of what their development is like. And again, like I said, we're about to enter pup season. And so, this is a really exciting time. And I think it's always fun to see how these pups develop over their first few weeks and few months. So at 5 weeks old, you can see that Nakai, his fur is very dark. So you might have noticed in that earlier photo, his fur today is very light in color. It's almost white. It's kind of a light beige tone. But when wolf pups are born, they are, born blind and deaf. They're incredibly vulnerable. They can't thermoregulate. This is all very similar to how puppies and kittens are born. So they really need protection. And having this dark coat of fur is also going to add a layer of protection. It helps them to camouflage in their nice dark den and keep them safe from potential predators. Around 2 weeks old, a wolf pup's eyes will start to open. They can't really see super well in the beginning. Their vision is pretty blurred, but as their eyes open, you'll see that they have this bluish gray color to their eyes. I'm sure we've all seen photos and videos and dog food commercials, everything, where they feature wolves that have piercing blue eyes. But adult wolves actually don't have blue eyes. But when they're pups and their eyes are still developing, again, just like puppies or kittens, their eyes will be this shade of blue. At around 6 weeks, maybe 6 to 8 weeks, their eyes will start to turn to that more permanent brown color that they have as adults. So also at 5 weeks, Nakai's age in this photo, that is when wolf pups are really starting to wean. So when they're first born, they're exclusively drinking their mother's milk. And as they get a little bit older, of course, they'll start to transition to a diet of mostly meat. So sometimes that looks like, parents or older siblings bringing meat to the den for those pups to try. And other times it looks like those adult wolves actually regurgitating their food for those pups, for the pups to sample. So I know it's a little bit gross, but that is how wolves operate. And so that transition will really coincide with the development of their teeth. This is Nakai at about 3 months old. So you can see he's starting to get that lighter color now. And what's happening is he's growing in his outer coat. So wolves, they have seasonally 2 layers of fur. They will always have this outer coat. Once it develops as a pup, they'll always have it there. And it gives them each their unique color. So of course, Alewa and Nakai, they look quite similar, but they don't have to be this color. They actually had a brother who was completely black. So it just depends on genetics, which color fur they'll end up with. So you can sort of see here that his fur is getting a little bit more wiry. So if you've ever pet a husky or a German Shepherd type dog, you kind of know what a wolf feels like. Their fur is kind of coarse to the touch. It's not super soft and fluffy, but that undercoat really is. And so what the difference is the outer coat, their guard hairs, they kind of work like a raincoat. So it has a light layer of oil on it and it repels moisture. And of course, that's going to keep them dry when they're in a rainstorm or they've gone for a swim, they're in mud and snow. It helps keep their fur dry, which of course will help them stay warm. If they have to shiver because they're cold and wet, they're going to be burning through a lot of calories and they're going to burn through their energy. And because wild wolves, their meals are not guaranteed, hunting is quite difficult. It's really important that they conserve their energy as much as possible. And then that undercoat, once they're adults, that undercoat will only be there seasonally. So again, that's that dark layer of fur underneath. And what the undercoat does is it traps in their body heat so that they can be comfortable in temperatures as low as -30 degrees. So now, this time of year at the Wolf Center, is a pretty interesting time, this seasonal transition. One of our first signs of spring at the Wolf Center is the wolves start to shed. And so we will actually get almost tumbleweeds of little clumps of wolf fur that will blow in the breeze or get caught on our fences or just kind of pile up anywhere. Um, it'll start to come off the wolves in these clumps or these fistfuls, and visitors often see them at this time of year and think, are they okay? Why do they look like that? But it's just their natural seasonal shedding. If any of you have, like I said, German Shepherds or anything like that, you're probably familiar with this time of year and their coats kind of being blown out as they start to shed and prepare for the warmer weather. So wolves, they do that in anticipation of the warmer months in the summer in order to keep themselves much more comfortable. But they probably are the most comfortable in the middle of winter when it's very cold. This is Nakai at 6 months old. So you can see he's getting those really big wolf paws. At this age, wolves, once they're past about 6 to 8 weeks, they don't really need to be in a den anymore. So at this age, they'll be following their families, their parents, their older siblings, and often they'll be left in the wild at areas that are referred to as rendezvous sites. And basically that can be a clearing or, an area in the forest or the mountains, just anywhere where the adult wolves kind of establish this as, this is where the pups will stay while we go out and hunt. They might be gone for hours. They might even be gone for a day. And then when they return, of course, it'll be a big celebration when they reunite with their pups. But at 6 months, a wolf pup can't really hunt on their own, but they are really learning. So through play, they're learning how to hunt, how to defend themselves, and they're also learning how to socialize. Because as pack animals, wolves really need to know how to communicate with each other. And so from their older siblings and sometimes even their parents, they'll learn what is appropriate or inappropriate behavior, or sometimes what is fun versus kind of annoying behavior. So if you've ever seen a puppy play with an older dog, you'll sometimes see those similar reactions. You'll see that puppy is just kind of biting them with their needle sharp teeth, and that older dog might snap at them, or that they might get up and walk away. And then that pup learns, oh well, what I wanted from this interaction was play, and maybe because I was too rough or just too persistent, I didn't really get what I wanted. So next time I need to learn that that is not how I'm going to behave if I want to get what I want out of this interaction. Here you can also see that Nakai's eyes have fully transitioned to that brown shade that they will be his entire life. And then this is what Nakai looks like now. So you can see that this photo, there's leaves on the ground. It's taken at the beginning of fall. So Nakai has now developed, again, that thick undercoat. He's preparing for winter. I wish I had a comparison photo of him in his winter coat versus his summer coat. It's a pretty stark difference. Definitely keep an eye on our website and our Facebook page and other social media pages, because you'll start to see the difference in the photos that we post seasonally, because the wolves will just start to look much leaner. It's almost surprising how different they look in these different seasons. So I'm sure we all recognize who this is: Little Red Riding Hood, and of course, the Big Bad Wolf. If you think about a lot of the stories that we grow up with, Little Red Riding Hood, the Three Little Pigs, The Boy Who Cried Wolf, we're kind of told over and over that wolves are the bad guy. Of course, we know these are stories. We know they're fairy tales. We know that a wolf would never eat grandma, wear her clothes, pretend to be her to try to get Little Red. But it does contribute to this cultural idea, this misconception that wolves are dangerous, that wolves are going to chase us through the woods and try to eat us. Wolves are terrified of people. The reason we have ambassador wolves is because wolves are naturally pretty terrified of people. So the ambassador wolves, again, they're there because they're socialized and they're curious about us rather than being cautious. The rest of our 28 wolves that live on site, we can't guarantee that anyone's going to see them when they visit. Most of them are off exhibit. We don't want those wolves to become habituated to people, but we do have 2 enclosures of endangered wolves that people can stop by and visit. And it's just up to the wolves if they come out. And so we really actually want to encourage that wariness of people, because once they're released into the wild, we don't want them remembering, oh, in the good old days at the Wolf Center, I used to get snacks through the fence. Maybe people will give me snacks, because of course, if they're released into the wild, a lot of people that they might encounter might be actively looking to harm them. And so we want those wolves to do exactly what they would do had they been raised in the wild, which is stay avoidant of people, stay far away. So even though we know that these stories are made up, they do contribute to this sense that wolves are going to harm people. And statistically, that is incredibly unlikely. So, if we were somewhere where there were wolves roaming around in the wild, you wouldn't really have to worry about encountering them. It's very unlikely that you would ever even see them. So that brings me to wolf relatives. In the Northeast, we don't have any wolves in the wild any longer, unfortunately. They would contribute to a lot of balance in the ecosystem that we're currently kind of lacking. We don't have many large predators in the area any longer. And so that means that our populations like white-tailed deer do kind of skyrocket in their absence. But their relatives that do live in the wild around us are the coyote, the fox. This is a red fox here, but there's also gray foxes. Their populations are just a little bit more sparse. So looking at these animals, particularly the coyote, you might think, well, clearly that coyote is a wolf's closest relative. They have very similar body shapes. Coyotes are quite a bit smaller, but their ear size, their bushy tails, their diets, in many ways, they're very similar to wolves. And they're close relatives. But in fact, a wolf's closest relative is the dog. This is my dog, Georgia. Of course, she doesn't look like a wolf. She is a mutt. She has all kinds of different breeds in her. But, a dog, whether it's Georgia here, whether it's a husky, like I mentioned before, a Chihuahua, a French bulldog with their little squished faces, they are all 98% wolf. And that is how much genetic material they share because they evolved directly from wolves. So really interesting to see how many physical differences there are, behavioral, but also how much overlap there is. Some dogs do look quite a bit like wolves or do act a lot like wolves. And that is because they are incredibly closely related. So I do see we have some questions or comments in the chat. I can't see the chat right now. I will answer them at the end. So hopefully I'm not, it doesn't seem like I'm ignoring your questions. I'll get to them at the end. So I'm going to switch and talk about wolf species in North America. In the world, there are two species of wolf, the gray wolf and the red wolf. And I'll go through specifically the species of wolves that we have at the Wolf Conservation Center. So our ambassador wolves, Alewa and Nakai, they are gray wolves, but more specifically, Canadian or Rocky Mountain wolves. So this is the type of wolf that you would see in Canada or in the Northern Rocky Mountains. So Yellowstone National Park, for example. And right now there's no release program for this subspecies of wolf, again, which is why we can have them as ambassador wolves. But our ambassadors don't breed with one another. One, they're siblings, but two, any pups that they would have to stay at the Wolf Conservation Center. And we want the fewest number of wolves in captivity as possible. So we keep our ambassador packs very small. And then we have another subspecies of gray wolf, the Mexican gray wolf. Again, this is an endangered species, and it's one of the species that we're working to conserve and protect at the Wolf Center. And then the red wolf, they're their own separate species. They're a distinct species from gray wolves. And this is a critically endangered species of wolf. In fact, this is the most endangered species of wolf in the entire world, or the most endangered canine in the entire world. So this just shows you a kind of map with population estimates. So you can see that red bubble over to the side shows that there are only 13 wild red wolves, and they live in a small protected area in North Carolina. So 13 is the known number. So basically that means there are 13 collared red wolves in North Carolina, but there might be a few more that have not been collared yet. When I say collared, I mean a GPS collar for tracking and monitoring purposes. But they estimate that maybe that total population of red wolves in the wild is about 19 individuals. So even if we're not accounting for, if we're counting more than just the GPS collared individuals, that number is still pretty low. Then over to the left, you can see that bubble that says 241 in the Southwest. That is our wild population of Mexican gray wolves. So they're in Arizona and New Mexico. And then outside of the US, there's about 40 of them in the wild in northern Mexico. And then these other bubbles show estimates of the other gray wolf populations throughout the United States. So this might seem like a lot. It's about 7,000 to 8,000 gray wolves in the US. They only occupy about 10% of their historic range. There used to be about 250,000 gray wolves. So when people say, there are just too many wolves in the wild, I want to ask, compared to what? Because this number is actually pretty small. So diving into the red wolf a little bit more, like I said, they are critically endangered. There's only about 13 of them living in the wild, and at the Wolf Conservation Center, we currently have 10, although maybe that number will change soon because this year we have 3 breeding pairs of our endangered wolves, and 2 of those pairs are red wolves. So hopefully we're going to see some pups possibly in the next week or 2, which would be very exciting. So this map shows the historic range of the red wolf. So this kind of lighter grayish blue swath in the east shows where they historically lived. Then you can see that orange spot at the bottom, kind of between Texas and Louisiana. That's where the final remnant population of wild red wolves came from. So when this species was going extinct, and there were just a few of them left in the wild, those remaining individuals were captured and brought into captivity. There were 17 total that were captured. Only about 14 of them were actually able to reproduce in captivity. And so today, that population, that captive population, is about 230 individuals. They all came from that founding population of 14, which means they are all very closely related, which is why it's so important that we have these breeding programs. Now, we're not just putting wolves together because we think their personalities would mesh and they would be a good fit. They're actually paired together based on their genetic makeup. So we are trying to, and I say we, but it's really the Federal Recovery Program. Every year they'll have a meeting and they will look at all the captive red wolves or all the captive Mexican gray wolves, depending on which meeting. And they will pair wolves together based on genetic diversity. And so they're trying to maximize that diversity as much as possible in order to encourage the health of this population. Because of course, when you have inbreeding, you're going to see higher frequency of certain diseases, mutations, you might see more sterility, and it's going to be very difficult to support this population into the future. And then over in coastal North Carolina, you can see that little tiny yellow spot, and that is where the recovery area is. So kind of near the Outer Banks area. So Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge is one of the main areas that these wolves have been reintroduced into the wild, and Poquoson Lakes. So they're kind of a coastal species there. But you can see, really, they would have been all along the east. And sadly, most people have never heard of them. So this is what they look like when they're first born. Really cute. They look like little tiny otters. So if you cup your hands together, you could fit a red wolf pup in the palms of your hands. They weigh just about a pound when they're first born. And just like I said with Mackay, you can really see they have that dark undercoat when they're born. And again, that's going to help them to camouflage. You can kind of tell here that their eyes are really sealed shut. They're not just closed. They actually cannot open them for a few weeks. And their ears are very floppy, and their ear canals are actually shut as well. So after a few weeks, their eyes, of course, will start to open. Their ear canals will start to open as well. And that vision and hearing will be very blurred or very muffled for the hearing. So when we have pups born at the Wolf Center, we're very hands-off. We only interact with them when we absolutely have to, and there are a few times that we have to go into the enclosures right after these pups are born. But keep in mind that with these endangered wolves, like I said, they're very afraid of people. And so we do not want to add any undue stress to their lives when they're trying to care for these young pups. But of course, there are some things we have to do for the welfare of these pups. But aside from that, we limit activity, construction, anything around their enclosures to try to make it a very peaceful, beginning for these little ones. When we first go in, we'll usually just do a quick check somewhere between birth and about 2 weeks old. That timeline might vary depending on different activities, and I'll go into that in a bit. But that is just kind of a cursory check, get an idea of how many pups are in this litter if we can't tell from our cameras, males versus females, and we'll weigh them. That's how we know they weigh about a pound. And that's what's happening in this image here. This little pup is in kind of what looks like a salad bowl or a mixing bowl, and is being weighed. And then we'll go back into the enclosures to do health checks when these pups are 2 months old, 3 months old, and 4 months old. And that is based on their vaccine schedule. So if you've ever raised a puppy, you know that they have to get a series of 3 vaccines from puppyhood. And that is their series of distemper vaccines. So they kind of get a series of 3, and then they'll get a booster annually. And that same thing applies to our little wolf pups here. So we'll do that. We'll also deworm them. And then once they're at usually about 4 months, that's when we'll also give them a microchip. So just like we would do with a dog or cat. It doesn't have any tracking capabilities, but it is a way to identify them in the future. And this is what a red wolf pup looks like at about 6 weeks old. Really cute. So you can see she's grown a lot in just a month and a half. She's up, she's moving, she's exploring, she's figuring out how to camouflage, not doing a very good job in this photo. Probably the most obvious thing about red wolves is their ears, particularly as an animal that would naturally live in the southeast where it's hot and humid. Having really large ears like this is a great way to help them thermoregulate. Because as their blood circulates through their ears and gets a little bit closer to that outside temperature, it helps to cool the blood before it kind of returns and circulates back through their body. So just like on a hot, humid day where you just sort of want to sprawl out and not do anything because it's just so sticky out and gross, it's kind of like we're doing the same thing. It helps us to kind of cool our body a little bit if we just, become a starfish and don't really move a whole lot. And this is what red wolves look like when they're fully grown. So you can see they're mostly brown despite their name, but behind their ears, the backs of their legs, that's where they get that kind of reddish, coppery color. And they do really blend in to their coastal environments. And you can see here, they're sitting on top of their den. If they were to just hunker down, they'd probably be almost invisible. I've taught some programs, this is gonna make me sound pretty silly, but I've taught some programs in front of our enclosures, and I'll say, I'm not seeing the red wolves. They must be on the far end of their enclosure, just kind of hunkered down. Maybe they're inside their den. And then a few minutes into talking, someone will say, "What's that?" And you'll see kind of an ear flick. And that red wolf has been, 20 feet from us this whole time, lying next to a log, and we just couldn't see them until they moved a bit. So when they don't want to be seen, they do a pretty good job of it. So for the Mexican gray wolf, like I said, they roam to the Southwest and Mexico. There's only about 241 of them living in the wild, and we have 19 at the Wolf Center, again, currently, because one of our breeding pairs is a pair of Mexican gray wolves. This was our most recent litter born at the Wolf Center. They were born this past May. Their parents, so if you have looked at our website, or if you plan to look at it after this, you can actually see all of our resident wolves, and their parents, we call them Trumpet and Lighthawk. Trumpet is mom, Lighthawk is dad. And so this year, if they do have pups, it'll actually be their 4th litter together. Trumpet, the female, is the most genetically valuable female Mexican gray wolf in the entire program, hence why she's had the opportunity to have so many pups. So this past May, she had 3 pups. You can see 2 of them are just having a good time in their enclosure there, just popping out of the den. And this little pup on the right, that photo where she's just being cupped in our curator's hands was actually taken the day she was released into the wild. So looking at that photo, you might think, Dana, that's not a very good idea. Her eyes aren't open. She can't hunt for herself. She's pretty tiny. What were you thinking? So she was part of a process called cross fostering. This is one of the ways that you can release wolves into the wild. Basically what happens is when you have a captive born wolf pup, or pups, sometimes it's 2 or even 3, depending on the litter size, you can actually place them in a wild den. It can't be any old wild den. It has to be one where the breeding female has pups. So she's already producing milk to feed those pups. And those pups have to be the same age as this little one. Even just a few days or a week of difference in their birthdays could mean that this pup is too small and competition will be too great for her to get the nutrients that she needs. So timing is really everything. And so that's what happened with this little pup. Her nickname was Crumbo, named after a conservationist that sadly went missing in Yellowstone, but really did a lot for the protection and advocacy for wolves. So we thought it was a nice way to honor him. She's actually our second cross-fostered pup. So our first was in 2019, also one of Trumpet and Lighthawk's pups, and she was placed into the wild as well. So little Crumbo, this is the den site where she was placed. She went to New Mexico. You can see this den would be probably almost impossible to find just by looking around. These pups are very well hidden. So this is the approximate area. She was placed into the Iron Creek Pack in New Mexico. And this is what the landscape looked like at that location. So the den is actually, it's out of frame here, but it's off to the right of this image. So we tend to think of wolves as really being in the forest or in mountainous regions, and that's often the case. But with Mexican gray wolves, they're also frequently on these wide open plains like this one. So this den wasn't just located by the field team, being out there and searching around and, crossing their fingers. The adults in this family group, in this pack, actually had GPS collars on. And so this is an example of a GPS collar here. So, it's kind of like a leather dog collar, but it has that antenna there and then the big battery pack. Looking at that, I know it looks like a really bulky battery. The reason it's so big is because it's meant to last 2 to 3 years. If it were smaller, unfortunately, that battery would die and that wolf would have to be recaptured. So this is a way to limit the stress on the wolf and maximize the potential for, data collection. This collar can only weigh 4% of an animal's body weight. I myself have collared animals when I've worked on past research projects, and I'll tell you, biologists are very picky about whether a collar will actually go on an animal. If it's going to be too big or too small, nope, not worth it. It's not worth the potential risk to that animal's ability to survive. And even in the least sentimental terms, that wouldn't get you good data. But really, of course, these people care and they want to make sure that they're not actively harming this animal that they're studying. So why do we do this? Why does the Wolf Conservation Center exist? Of course, we love wolves. We think they're really wonderful, but it's really more than that. Wolves have a vital role in nature. They belong. They have an ecological role that really kind of can't be understated and can't be replaced by other creatures. So wolves are carnivores. They're meat eaters, of course. Are they eating meat like this? Absolutely not. Nakai thinks Little Red Riding Hood is gross, scary. He doesn't want anything to do with her. But instead, they're eating animals called ungulates primarily. So hooved animals, elk, bison, musk ox, moose, caribou. These are just some examples. White-tailed deer would be another example if we're talking about the East. This is a lot of food for a wolf. These animals can weigh 600 to 1,000 pounds, and a gray wolf is about 80 to 120 pounds. So, that's quite a big size difference, hence why wolves typically hunt in packs. But hunting is really difficult, it's very dangerous. These ungulates don't particularly want to be someone's dinner, so of course they're going to defend themselves. So this elk here could use his antlers, he could kick a wolf. Even just a small injury for a wolf in the wild could mean they don't survive much longer. Something as simple as a cracked tooth could lead to infection or just such discomfort that they can't successfully hunt or really eat. And, they're not being seen by a vet out there. So the wolves have to be incredibly careful when they're hunting for their food. They're also just difficult to catch. A healthy elk or deer can run about 40 to 45 miles per hour. A wolf can run about 35 miles per hour. And they can't do it for very long. So they can reach that high speed, but they can't really maintain it. They're much better at going about 5 miles per hour over long distances, but they'll get tuckered out pretty quickly. So instead, what wolves do is they will go after the animals that are a little bit easier to catch. So that means the injured, the elderly, the young, the ones that kind of straggle behind. Wolves are coursing predators, which means that they will chase the herd and go after the stragglers. And in some cases, that means the sickly animals. So let's say, for example, this deer has a contagious illness. Well, she lives in a really large herd. And so whatever germs she has, whatever disease she has, it's likely to spread pretty quickly to the rest of the group. But when you have animals like wolves and other large carnivores that specifically target these sick animals, they actually effectively, reduce the spread of that disease by removing this individual. They're preventing her from spreading those germs further. And when you think about, how humans often hunt animals, they'll go for the largest, most impressive individuals. And by killing them, they're often removing those strong, healthy genes from that population. Whereas the way wolves hunt, removes kind of the weaker genes and allows the strong, healthy animals to survive and reproduce. So they really support these other populations, even when they're kind of, actively removing them. They really support them and allow them to kind of be self-sustaining and maintain healthy, strong numbers. So other animals really benefit from living around wolves as well. So grizzly bears, eagles, black bears, ravens, coyotes, red foxes. These are just a few examples of animals that will benefit from being around wolves. Because those wolves are taking down such large prey, they'll eat as much as they possibly can, which for a wolf can be about 20 pounds in one sitting. There's going to still be a lot of food left over. So these animals will come in and they will scavenge on what's left over of that carcass until, oops, now my thing is not progressing, until there's absolutely nothing left. There we go. You just have kind of this skeleton here. And even then some animals will come in and they will gnaw on those bones as a source of calcium. So just to kind of quickly go through the pack and behavior before I move to questions. A wolf pack or family is not really all that different from our family structure. You have the breeding pair, the parents. They're kind of the ones that make all the rules. If you're interested, this is actually Trumpet and Lighthawk's family. So that photo of the parents there, Trumpet is on the left and Lighthawk is on the right. They make very beautiful pups. So of course, pups, they're the kids, and all together they make up the pack or the family. Those older siblings will stick around and they will help their parents raise the youngsters. They'll help defend the territory, look for food, and they really all work together. Wolves have really strong emotional bonds. They will visibly and sometimes audibly grieve when family members pass. We have a wolf, one of our Mexican gray wolves at the Wolf Center. Her name is Valentia. And she lived with a male wolf. They weren't a breeding pair, but they were companions. And he passed away just about 2 months ago. And for the next 3 weeks after his passing, Valentia howled almost 24/7. She was really, really struck by that loss. And it was hard for all of us to hear because there was nothing we could do. But of course, I'm sure even harder for her to experience. She was really looking for him. And it was very sad, but a very good reminder that they're not just survival machines. They do have incredibly strong emotional bonds with one another. Of course, wolves have to communicate with their family members. So one way they'll do that is marking their territories. That communicates to family as well as neighboring packs of wolves that this is my territory. This is, I'm in charge. This is how recently I was here. This is my health status, all things like that. And then body language. So in a wolf pack, there's always two wolves in charge. I'm sure we've all heard the term alpha wolf. The gentleman that coined that term was actually observing captive wolves when he thought he was seeing one dominant wolf. But these captive packs were actually unrelated wolves that were thrown in an enclosure together. So they had nothing to do with each other, no loyalty to each other. They were just trying to survive. And so he did see what looked like a wolf coming out on top. But he has now spent about 5 decades of his career trying to tell people he was mistaken, trying to get his books pulled from the shelves because he regrets using that term. It is not an accurate reflection of how wolves behave. In a pack, you'll have two wolves in charge, and that's the breeding pair. They're not there because they're stronger or they fought there. They're there because they're mom and dad. That being said, in some of these captive packs, you do still see that even if they're not a breeding pair, you'll have a male and a female wolf in charge. So here we have Lucas on the right, that kind of more gray wolf, and Apache on the left. Apache was kind of the male wolf in charge in this group. And you can see that he is reminding Lucas that he's kind of, the boss. He's going to make all the calls and the decisions. He's doing that with his body language. Tail is up, head is forward, ears are forward. He's standing very strong. And Lucas is telling him, yep, I understand. I'm not looking for any trouble. He's leaning away. He's curving away from him. His ears are back and he's not making eye contact. And again, a lot of this behavior will, overlap with what we see our dogs do. Here we have those two again. So Apache is the whiter wolf, Lucas is the grayer one, and he's just reminding him, I have these big teeth. I can use them if I want to. They're not going to harm each other. They are family. But he's just kind of leaning over him, giving him a nibble on his ear. And Lucas is leaning down, and he's also licking his lips. And again, that's something we'll see in dogs as well. They'll lick their lips. They'll lick the lips of other wolves. They'll yawn. These are all calming signals as a way to kind of diffuse a situation and relieve some stress. And then howling, probably their most famous form of communication. Wolves howl for a few reasons. They'll howl to communicate over long distances with family. So, hey, I'm over here, let's regroup. They'll howl to advertise their territory to neighboring groups of wolves. And then we also call howls social glue. It kind of seems like they just howl sometimes because it feels good. It's sort of like singing around a campfire or singing in the car with friends and family to your favorite song. It's kind of this bonding moment that reaffirms their social bonds with each other. So just to kind of wrap up, we want people to understand, as much as we love wolves, wolves are not pets. Having wolves or wolf dogs as pets is not a good way to, encourage their conservation. We get calls all the time with people saying, I have this wolf or wolf dog. I can't keep them anymore. I found out, or someone found out, and I'm in trouble, things like that. And so we want people to understand that they're not meant to be pets. So just to wrap up, these are ways that you can help as an individual. It sounds like someone came unmuted. So this is just a screenshot from our website. You can join our email list. You can adopt a wolf symbolically. You can volunteer if you're in the area, all kinds of different things. Okay, so now I'll switch over to questions if anyone has them.
You want to adopt a wolf symbolically? No, I want it.
All right, let's see. Do we have any questions here?
I got this to the library, by the way.
Oops, sorry, I clicked someone to unmute. I didn't mean to do that. All right, if anyone has any questions, you are welcome to unmute yourself. I'm going to look at our chat and see, let's see what we've been talking about in here. Oh, someone mentioned they came to the Wolf Center last October for an overnight program. That is something that you can visit, especially if you're further away. Starting the first week of May into mid-October, we have our Sleeping with Wolves program, which we set up tents, we order pizza, we watch a movie by the Ambassador Wolves. It's a ton of fun. And as this viewer said, they got to hear the wolves howling at 3 a.m. It's a really special experience. Of course, I'm a little biased, but it's a very popular program. So if you're interested in spending a night at the Wolf Center, definitely go to our website. It sells out pretty quickly. So, and I'll put the website in the chat in just a moment. Let's see. Some people raise the idea of reintroducing wolves to Britain. Do you think it's practicable to release wolves to environments with significant populations of humans? I think it really depends. It's kind of a case-by-case basis. There's plenty of situations where large carnivores do live near people. I've previously worked on a project in Southern California where I was studying the mountain lions in Los Angeles. And there's very few instances of there actually being conflict between an animal like a mountain lion and people. It does happen on occasion, but it's very infrequent. A lot of it has to do with, using non-lethal methods, using a lot of coexistence methods, removing attractants and hazing animals. So kind of being loud and frightening them off when they get close, discouraging them from really becoming comfortable around people. Let's see, I've adopted Rosa, she's one of our Mexican wolves. Is there any possibility of her being released into the wild? Rosa likely will not be released into the wild. She's pretty elderly at this point. I think she's 12 or 13 years old. So she'll live out the rest of her days at our center. But it's certainly possible that some of her pups in the past, or that some of her pups could be released. And Rosa is actually grandmother to Trumpet's pups. So some of her grand pups are living in the wild, which is pretty exciting. Are there any red wolves living in the wild? Yes, there are about 13. Does the wolf get sick from the diseased animal that they might eat? Never say never. I'm sure there's some diseases that will transfer between a deer to a wolf, but for the most part, it's pretty safe for wolves. They have very strong immune systems, very strong stomachs, and most of their diseases will not be shared. What's the most common reason a wolf would end up in your care? So the majority of the wolves that live at the Wolf Center were actually born in captivity. So about half of them were born at our center. Others came from other breeding facilities to either be paired with wolves here or because we had a vacant enclosure. And that's how this recovery program works. A lot of wolves will be moved between different locations. But of course, the ultimate goal is release into the wild. It's just not always the reality for these wolves because wolves are a very politicized animal. It's much easier said than done to release wolves into the wild. We do have one wolf at our center that was born in the wild, and that is Lighthawk, that Mexican gray wolf who has now fathered 3 litters of pups, hopefully a 4th soon. Lighthawk, when he was about a year old, he was living in Arizona. That's where he was born. And he was traveling with a female wolf that started to harass livestock animals. To put it in perspective, livestock or wolves account for 0.009% of livestock deaths. So their impact on cattle and sheep that are grazing in the wild or grazing on these ranches is greatly exaggerated. But usually when there's a situation where a wolf is attacking livestock, that wolf will be killed. It's called a removal order, which is a nice way of saying a kill order. And fortunately for Lighthawk, they had this exception that if one of these wolves could be trapped, they could go live in captivity, and Lighthawk was trapped. He will never be released into the wild. He is sadly considered a problem wolf, even though he was just trying to survive. But, you know, of course, 2 of his pups have now been released into the wild, which is very exciting. Let's see. Oh, I see a raised hand, so I'm just going to go to that and then go back to our chat box in a second. Okay, go ahead, Dynasty. I think you can unmute. There you go.
Good question.
I have 3 questions.
Wonderful.
For question 1.
How many colored wolves are there? And
How many colors are there
of wolves?
of wolves? That is a great question. It really depends on which type of wolf we're talking about. So with the wolves like Alewa and Nakai, they can be gray, they can be tan, they can be black, they can be really all different colors. Red wolves are mostly brown with a little bit of red, and Mexican gray wolves are usually a combination of black, gray, white, and sometimes a little bit of brown. But then there's other types of wolves. So Arctic gray wolves are completely white, so that they can blend in with the snow. It really just kind of depends on who we're talking about. Great question.
What's the
You have
second?
another one?
Where do wolves mostly live?
Oh, that's a great question as well. So they mostly live, if we're talking about the US, they mostly live in Alaska. But we do have quite a few gray wolves throughout the states. But it's just really kind of spread out, mostly I'd say in the Midwest.
And your last question.
What do wolves mostly eat?
Oh, we already saw, remember?
Oh, yeah.
I'll remind you though. So wolves
Yeah.
mostly eat
I'll remind you.
meat. But you know, they're usually eating these large animals, but there's actually some populations of wolves that will catch beavers when they can. And there's a population of wolves in Michigan that a study has found in the summertime, they will eat blueberries. Because in the summertime, it's really difficult for wolves to catch food for themselves because that food they're running away. They have all the food they need. They have lots of energy, and so they can run away from wolves. But blueberries, they don't go anywhere. They just grow on these bushes in the wild. And so wolves will eat lots and lots of blueberries in the summer. And they'll even feed them to their pups. So our ambassador wolves, will give them meat, but we'll also sometimes give them snacks of watermelon, bananas. This weekend, we gave them some eggs for Easter and some carrots. So we'll give them a little bit of variety as well. Those were great questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
for
you.
answering.
Wait.
Say thank you for answering.
Thank you for answering my questions.
Yeah, thank you for asking them. Okay, let's see. Okay, so we have someone who adopted Zephyr a few years ago. You have a plush that you carry around with you everywhere you go. Love and miss him so much. Me too. Zephyr. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, Zephyr, he was the black wolf that I had in some of my photos here, and he was one of our ambassador wolves, brother to Alewa and Nakai, and he passed away this past July. And so we've all been adjusting, especially his siblings, but he was really, really wonderful. He's actually on my business cards. Let's see, can I talk about the wolves reintroduced into Yellowstone and how it's helped with vegetation regrowth? So there is a video that is shared very frequently. It's called How Wolves Change Rivers. It's a very interesting video, but it's a little bit wonky in the science, but it does really show that wolves have a very important role in the ecosystem. When they were reintroduced into the wild, they had a major impact on the deer populations, which had an impact on the vegetation. So I encourage you to look up that video, but watch it with a grain of salt, because it's not totally accurate, but it is still, very fascinating. Let's see. Oh, wow. People are coming from everywhere. Okay. So it sounds like
That is up in business. It looks like it's something to do with law.
all right. So do we have any other questions here? All right. I'm not seeing any raised hands or anything else in the chat. So I'm going to put our website in the chat. I lost the chat here. Let's find it. So let's see. You can find us at nywolf.org. That's where you can read about all our wolves, read about what you can do to help wolves. You can watch our webcams. All of our enclosures have at least 2 cameras. And I highly recommend in the next few weeks, keeping an eye on those cameras, because the 3 enclosures you want to look at are Tyke and Lava. They're some of our red wolves. Jacques and Sage, they're another pair of red wolves, and then Trumpet and Lighthawk. Those are our 3 breeding pairs. And so we might see some pups there. We'll announce them on our social media pages. But if you want to see little pups, sometimes people get to watch from all over the world as these endangered wolf pups enter the world, which is so fascinating, really wonderful. But again, you can find our calendar there if you want to register for a program. If you think of questions later and you'd like to email us, feel free. But thank you, everyone. Thank you so much to the Rochester Library and Nancy for putting this together. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your night.
Thank you, Dana.
Yeah.
Great. I love these wolves and I want to go on this overnight sleepover.
It's fun. It's really fun. And I love it, especially if people have never camped before. All the stress is taken out of it. Your tent is there, your food is handled. You just have to show up with all the stuff you need to comfortably sleep, and you get to have a really fun adventure.
We need a library trip, Nancy.
We do. Let me just ask you, I grew up in Westchester County and that's where you're located. When did you open?
We opened in 1999.
Oh, okay. I was gone by then.
Oh,
This was great. You have a wonderful job
yeah, I think so too. I feel pretty lucky.
and a hard job, but it's great. Thank you again.
Yeah,
And thanks to everyone.
Hey
Thank you,
Nancy,
everyone.
where are you gonna post this video?
NewYorkWolf.org.
I don't know where she went.
No.
Nancy,
Yeah,
are you
she-
still there?
Oh, I'm
She's on-
here. I'm sorry. I didn't hear the question.
Where are you gonna post this video that you were recording?
the recording, I will send the recording to everyone. It takes a while for it to upload to our cloud, but by tomorrow I will send it out to everyone.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your night. And again, thank you, Nancy, for putting this together.
Sure. Go
Thank
and
you, Nancy. Thank you, Dana. It was wonderful.
Thank
It
you.
was.
Bye,
hold the
everyone.
wolves for us. Bye-bye, everyone. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.